Okay, we're going to take a minute to introduce our speaker tonight. Is Bill Iseminger, known as Mr. Mound. For those of you who don't know, he's been here at least 1,000 years. I think he started, and then he retired and came back. So he's going to do his presentation on revealing Cahokia's Mound number 1. And so thank you, Bill. Welcome.
Thank you. Just for those of you who aren't familiar with Mound 1, it's the easternmost mound in the Cahokia complex. And for those who are familiar with the area, it's right next to where the Fairmount racetrack is. So you can see in this photo here, it looks like a flat top mound. We're not positive whether it's conical or round, but it certainly became flat top in a modern house, and the one before that were built at that location. So this is a map of the Cahokia site showing the location of mounds 1 and 2, which mark again the eastern boundaries on the southern bank or western bank of Canteen Creek, which flows into the mist. And it's kind of isolated. You can see there's a number of small mounds that are indicated here. I'll talk about that in a minute. We're not sure about some of those, but Cahokia originally probably around 120 mounds. Could have been more. John, in some of his work, has found some buried mounds or mound remnants that don't show up on the surface, but they are buried, especially right about in this area here. I've got those mound 109, and there's another little dot there. We found some buried now. The original 120 or so, there's probably about 80 that survive in some form or another in the area. Many were plowed down by farmers, highways, subdivisions, discount stores, etc. The state of Illinois owns about 2,200 acres, and there's about 70, I think 2 or 3 mounds within the state property. So there's a few that are outside current land that the state owns, and so there's been a lot of discussion about Cahokia's layout and planning, organization. Various people have come up with ideas. 1 and 2 down here at the eastern end. It's on a kind of a straight line from the Powell Mound at the western edge of the Cahokia site. And by the way, the Tinker Hut House the Powell Archaeological Research Center has would be right about here on the map. And so some of these orientations have led to various theories and hypotheses about Cahokia's organization, which I won't go into tonight. That's a whole other program. So there are old maps of the site. The most famous one we call the Patrick map, made from the 1870s. And here we're showing a blow up of the eastern end of that map, showing where mounds 1 and 2 are situated along Canteen Creek. This is Collinsville Road. And this one kind of shows it as more of a conical shaped mound. It shows mound number 2 is more of a flat top, sort of teardrop shaped mound. A lot of people were thinking of it as a ridge top mound, but it does not appear to be that kind of shape when you look at this old map. Another map from the 1909 Metro East Sewer District shows mound 1 here, and it's got a little square on the top, so that's when there was a house there on top of that mound at that time. So now it's got a flattened surface and with a mound on it. Mound 2 would be right about here where this contour number is. Doesn't show on this particular map. And again, Collinsville Road and some low slough areas from probably not only the meandering of Canteen Creek over time, but also Little Canteen Creek came into join up with Canteen Creek somewhere in this area. This is a 1922 aerial photograph of the site, and it shows Monk's Mound down here at the bottom, looking east. Again, Collinsville Road, Canteen Creek, and under these trees here is where Mound 1 and Mound 2 were situated. But notice out in the fields here is all farmland at that time. The state had not acquired the property yet. You can see other mounds, some very obvious. Some of these fields here, but all these little white splotches you see here are also mounds for the most part. Notice you're not seeing things here. Remember that first map I showed you a cluster of small mounds. So we were kind of curious about that. And here's a 1940s aerial photograph. Looking down, kind of hard to see, but where the trees are right here, that's Mound 1. Mound 2 was here, and these had houses on them at that time. There's the Fairmont Racetrack, and obviously Canteen Creek. Now the creek was kind of straightened out into a drainage canal about 1916 or somewhere in that area. And but it originally had a few more little bends and things in it prior to that. But just to give you an idea of the setting, you know, where these mounds were in relation to Monk's Mound, again, about a mile and a half to east of Monk's Mound. Well, when John found a map, I don't know where you found it.
In the bank in Columbia.
A bank in Columbia.
Yeah, well, the Associated Bank had a big map of this area, but Metro East in particular, sitting on the wall, and they had accidentally cut into it, and I asked if they were going to get rid of it. I'd take it, because you can tell the story from there.
Okay, anyway, for those who couldn't hear, we found this map in a bank in Columbia, Illinois, much bigger map of the area, and they were getting rid of it apparently, and he asked if he could have it, and sure enough, they gave it to him. But what's interesting, here's where Mound 1 and 2 would be on the map. Notice the Fairmont Jockey Club, that'd be the racetrack area. But notice here it says Fairmont Golf Club. And when you start thinking about a golf course, they got tees and they got greens. So maybe some of those little things that show up, again, to go back to this photograph in the air, you see these little white spots here and there scattered in that land. That's where that golf course is eventually built, probably in the 1940s. And so Dr. Fowler, when he did the Cahokia Atlas and the Cahokia Mapping Project, he did assign numbers to those just in case they are mounds. Now it's possible the golf course may have utilized mounds that were already there and modified them or whatever. But since there's nothing to really say for sure in some of the older maps that there were mounds there, I think John's interpretation of these probably being part of the golf course is probably accurate. We do have a couple seats up here in front if you want to join us up here.
Christmas.
So at that time, in the 40s, Cahokia Mounds was just 144 acres. Like I said, we do now have 2,200 acres. So we acquired a lot more of this property. And there were subdivisions built here and over in this area. So a lot of the site was impacted by those. And I mentioned Melvin Fowler's Cahokia Mapping Project from 1966. We did photogrammetric metric mapping of the site from aerial photographs, and he was able to identify where a lot of the mounds were based on the contour intervals, etc. And he did include Mound 1 and 2 This one you can see, Mound 1 shows that there was a house on top of that. Mound 2 also had a house that pretty much consumed the whole mound, except for a little bit of it. Canteen Creek, as I mentioned, was made into a canal to help control drainage in the area, and the 19 teens sometime, and they took the spoil dirt from excavating that trench to create a levee. What we call levees are actually spoil banks on either side. And so that spoil bank here did impact a little bit of the east side of Mound 1. This is a map that John made in 2024. Various iterations. This was for the publication we did on the excavations that we're talking about tonight. So the shapes of the mounds have changed with some modern construction and destruction, but they're still visible today. As we saw earlier, there was a house built. It shows up on that 1909 map. It apparently burned down. Then later another house was built, probably in the 50s. We're not exactly sure when this photo was made, whether it was during that time or sometime later, but it does show the house sitting on top of the mound. Now here's another photo from 1991 when we started getting ready to do the excavations out there. And Mound 1 is here in the foreground. The house you see back there is actually the one on Mound 2. This house had already been removed, this house here. We were concerned that there was going to be commercial development there, or someone would buy that property who would cause more damage to the site and the mounds. And so, in anticipation that that might happen, we decided to do some excavations there. We first did some testing around the mounds with soil or post augers to get an idea of some of the soil types. And this is Mike Morlock. He mentioned earlier it was also working with John in East St. Louis. Then Gayle Fritz, who's sitting over here in the middle, she's a professor at Washington University and was teaching an archaeological methods class, and she saw this as an opportunity to get them experience and also to help us with learning more about this mound. Myself, Dr. Kelly in the background, were kind of directing the project for the most part. Gayle's assisting with that as well. First we had to do the mapping of the site. Here's John with some of the students from that class, setting up a total station survey instrument, which then was used to map the mound and the terrain around it as well, and Mound 2 as well. Again, the house is gone now. There's a house back here, again, is on Mound 2. So this is a sort of close-up of that map that we saw earlier, showing the contours. I mentioned we did see there was some impact on the east side by the levee for Canteen Creek. When the house was taken down, it had been abandoned for a while, and it was considered a health hazard. And I'm not sure who did the removal, but they took a bulldozer and actually dug a trench into that back side, the north side of the mound, to help remove the material as the house was destroyed and taken down. On this side, there's a driveway, and there's a fence line and several trees, so that made it very difficult to conduct a test excavation there. So we decided to go to this southern part of the mound. Now there was a set of stairs, concrete stairs, went up to the house, and a concrete sidewalk here that led over to the driveway. But we did set up our excavation units here, 1, 2, 3, and 5. We didn't dig on top because this house had a basement. And so the top of the mound had been pretty well impacted by that construction. So we decided to set in our units here. And here we are beginning with the excavations test unit 1, unit 2, and unit 3. The ones you see right here. Going down a little bit at a time, as we do in archaeology, normally about 10 centimeters at a time. And we were getting some historic materials on that upper level, as you would expect. And we also were getting some ceramics, Indian native ceramics as well. And we were kind of confused a little bit because they seem to be earlier than the mounds. And I'll explain that in a minute. We also found some little spaceman here. And there's a headless and armless cowboy that came out of the film, probably from the kids that lived in the house at some time. These were in these upper zones of the excavation units. As we began to dig down, again, units 1, 2, and 3, and the 5th one was down here where kind of hard to see, but that's where the sidewalk is as well. So we were getting things like coat hangers and garden rake heads, a lot of limestone, and again, most of the historic materials in this upper zone. You can see it's very unusual looking. You can see a lot of the bits of limestone and other modern materials in the profiles. We were about this stage when kind of a scruffy old guy came up and said, why are you guys digging here? And we told him, well, we're trying to find the original mound that was here. He said, I built that mound. And he said, well, we knew better than that because it shows up on those old maps. He wasn't that old. And, but we were interested in what he had to say. Well, apparently, the house that had been on, the original house had been there that had burned down. The land was, and the mound was purchased by a Dr. Kane. And he had a farmstead up on the bluffs, up near Glen Carbon, about where Interstate 270 cuts through the bluff by 157, if you're familiar with the highways. And we know from archaeological work in that area that there was what's called the Kane Village up in that area. And apparently what they were doing is he had them haul dirt from his bluff property to add to this mound, and then built this house on top of that. So that kind of explains why we're getting what we call emergent Mississippian materials, ceramics and things, from that Glen Carbon area and hauled down here. So we were kind of concerned when he told us that he built the mound, but then when he told us where the dirt came from, it helped us understand a little bit better what was happening here. So as we continued digging, this lighter zone that you see, this is all the 4 different sides of the top unit number 1. The lighter colored soils are that added dirt from the bluffs. It's a loess soil, it's kind of yellowish looking when you see it fresh. And then we did start to encounter more of a brown layer than a darker grayish brown below that, which indicated to us this was part of the original mound that had been there. And when we go to the next unit, down unit 2, we saw kind of a continuation of that. A lot of the disturbed modern fill at the top. Then we get into these lighter or darker colored zones that were part of the original mound. The arrows in here are pointing to north in the photos. Unit number 3 We didn't have a lot of time and a lot of people, so we knew that this would be a continuation of what we saw in units 1 and 2, but we wanted to get down deep enough so we could see where the darker line here is for the original mound. But then we stopped working in that particular unit. And you can see it here again, the modern fill, then the original mound, top of that, just below it. So, in order to get a good long profile of this upper area, we decided to take out the bulk between the two units 1 and 2, so we could have a 4-meter long profile that gave us a better understanding of what this, the mound construction. So here we are with some of our volunteers. Gene here, and Joe Glockner, let's go there. Bonnie Gums, who's from SIU Edwardsville, helped out as well with some of the digging and mapping, but also she was a specialist in historic materials and helped identify a lot of the things for us from those upper zones. That's myself here, and Marilyn Gass, who used to work here at the Mounds. We were using a lot of volunteers, including a lot of members of the Cahokia Archaeological Society that assisted us throughout this project. So we, instead of taking down the whole 2 meters square, we just started to take down the eastern half, again to cut back on the amount of labor and the limited time that we had. So we did a trench about 50 centimeters wide, which we're standing in down here. Here you see the width of that deeper trench. And here's that eastern profile of the 2 upper units, 1 and 2. And here we've labeled the zones 1 and 2 is the modern fill. Zone 3 is this more brown color. That's a capping on the top of the mound. We think it was probably capped with the original construction, but it could be a later addition to the mound. It's one of those things you can't tell for sure. Then down below, there's more gray colored soil is the primary mound. And we can actually see basket loads of soil piled up in there. And you'll see that in one of the other photos I'll show you in a minute. But we assigned zone numbers to each of these. Down below, zones 5 and 6 are part of the original surface, probably what we call B horizons. We think they originally stripped off the sod level, and we see this not only here at Cahokia and other mound sites, but oftentimes when before a mound is built, they're stripping the land, cleaning it off, probably doing some leveling before they build the mound itself. They probably stockpile some of that soil that they scraped off for part of the construction material as well. So these lower zones, 5 and 6, are part of that original surface. But you can see the terrain was actually sloping down naturally as well. And so there might have been kind of a small ridge here and kind of a basin as you head towards the south. But again, the primary mound, the capping soil, and then the modern soil at the top. Looking at the northern end of that trench, unfortunately we had kind of a storm one time, and a lot of that upper zone caved out. We think there probably were some rodent burrows that the water got into. But you can still see this zone 1 and 2, zone 3, zone 4, and then 5 and 6, the sterile zones below the mound. And here you can see the actual basket loads. Here's a close-up of that. So here you see a basket load of sort of medium gray, the dark gray, and light gray. So we can tell how big a basket load is sometimes. And this is all dirt carried in baskets, dug probably with stone hose from the local soils. What's interesting when you zoom in on that juncture between the basket-loaded fill and the sterile zone beneath, there's this whole series of kind of angular, zigzagging face between those two units. And what I think is happening here is that they're probably using a stone hoe attached to a handle, scraping the soil to remove the sod and create a surface for the construction of the mound. So I think those are probably tool marks in a way that we see in cross section here. I don't know if John agrees with everything I'm saying. I know he has other opinions sometimes. And is not afraid to tell me. So then we went to the bottom unit, unit number 5, and Al Meyer here and Joe Glockner again. Right where the plastic is, that's sitting on top of where that sidewalk was in front of the mound. So the slope comes down, then it kind of levels off. So we're below the modern slope of the mound here. And again, as we dug into it, we can see again this is a black and white photo, so you can't see the color here. But the modern fill, some of that up on top. Then there's these fine laminated layers of soil that we see here. And as we dug deeper, apparently there were periods of flooding of Canteen Creek, and it laid down some of these fine silty sandy layers. And then we get below that, then we get into part of the mound itself, the original mound. So we have these this zone here of these flood deposits, and then as we get below, it's kind of hard to see in some of these photos, but you can see some of the different construction episodes in the mound itself. All right. There we go. So here's a map that John put together based on all this work on these profiles as we're looking towards the east, and those trenches. Modern surface with the grass and sod up here. Modern fill from the 1950s. And here in the southern unit, you can see those laminated layers of flood deposits. The original ground surface, as you can see, it does appear to be sloping down like this was some kind of a ridge here that they built upon. Basket loaded fill, also showing down in the southern unit. The capping of the mound with this dark sort of brown colored soil. And we did like a bucket auger and also a probe to go down a little bit deeper than the floor of our excavations. And then we can see this natural zone here. This would be the ones that were 5 and 6 zones before. But the probe here went even deeper, and the very bottom we can see some of this yellowish soil, sandier type soil. But again, looks like there was probably some kind of a natural swale here, and we're seeing that same part of what we see up here. So I know it's a little confusing to look at some of this, but there's a lot of work. We had a lot of good people working on this during the time period we were there. As far as artifacts, there weren't very many. We did find this bird effigy, which would be on the rim of a bowl, a ceramic bowl. The tail would be on the opposite side. And usually, you often think of this as a wood duck because it has kind of a crest on it. But it could be just any kind of generic bird. In the upper modern fill, in the surface is where we found some of these pieces. which turned out to be the emergent Mississippian pottery from the Cane site up on the bluffs near Glen Carden. Got a few pieces in that capping layer over the mound. Some Powell plain, front and back of it, and some smaller fragments that all seem to be relating to what we call the Moorhead phase of Cahokia, which is basically about 1200 to 1300 AD. So it would seem that this, from what we're seeing here, and this would date to that same general period, we're probably looking at a mound that may have been built kind of late in Cahokia's sequence. But we're on the very slope, or the outside of the mound. We don't know what's under that central area. So we don't have a whole lot to go on, but based on what we're seeing here, we're suggesting that it was most likely built during the Moorhead phase. So, what was the purpose of Mound 1 and 2? Like I said, they're at the eastern end of the Cahokia site. So this would be an access point for people coming in from the east to enter Cahokia, but also a place for the residents of Cahokia to leave the site to go out to tend to the agricultural fields that probably extended for miles around the city to grow the amount of food they needed to feed all the people. Also, people who were the hunters and gatherers going into the forested uplands and slopes of the bluffs, hunt deer, gather nuts, berries, other kinds of fruits and botanical materials. So they would have to pass through or pass by these mounds to get to the access to those areas. There are probably other routes as well. I suggest that there may have been some kind of a, call it a bridge for whatever term you want to use, but kind of like you're showing here. Probably long logs spanning the trench of Canteen Creek that would allow people access to the eastern areas. Other people will be coming in from other sites, probably for ceremonial periods, or festivals and things that were taking place on Cahokia's Grand Plaza or in other times of the year. Cahokia Creek was also a major stream that Canteen Creek joined. Eventually that again flows into the Mississippi near East St. Louis. So we don't know if those mounds had some kind of function that related to the people coming and going from Cahokia or not. You know, it's all conjectural at this point. But we wish we knew a little bit more about that mound. We were somewhat limited in what we were able to do there with the time and the personnel that we had, but at least we were able to find out something more than we knew before. And also, this is land that the Archaeological Conservancy did eventually acquire, so they now protect those two mounds and some of the adjacent property. So, that's kind of a quick summary of what we know about Mound 1 and a little bit about Mound 2. John did some additional excavations in the Mound 2 area several years after this project. I can't remember what year you were out there. 2010. And there was a lot of that mound had been impacted by the house that was on it. But you were able to see at least some profiles at the edges of the mound, or did confirm that there was a mound there. And you want to say anything more about what you found there?
Well, I mean, we just did the one profile when we cleaned the floor, because it also had a sort of a half basement. The person that lived there at the time we were working at Mound 1 was a local guy.
Yeah.
He he's, I think, serving a prison term for murder.
Yes.
That's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, after they, a couple from northern Illinois came down and bought the property before the Conservancy got it. And they were involved with the racetrack. They drove one of these big, Buicks, no, it was a Buick or with the pins, from the 70s or 60s and 70s with the, I mean, it was classic. It was like, straight out of the movies. And they didn't realize what they had. They wanted to, do more with the property. And when you begin to tell them there was a state, that there was a state law that while you could excavate a mound, you would have to pay the cost of removing it. And that's not a, given the labor, not that we are paid a lot of money to do excavations, it still involves a lot of money. And so they decided they would just sell the property, but it was the landlord that pulled a quick one on them and used the Museum Society here as a fold for it all. The poor couple was sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. And that was before he went to prison. They didn't get him for fraud, but anyway. So when we scraped the floor at the basement, there was all sorts of, not human bone, but there was animal bones and ceramics that were in really good condition. And then we just did a section of the profile that you could see the mound. It was only about 3 or 4 feet high. Yeah. So, and then they covered, after they had removed the house and the remains, they covered it back over, and then, of course, the Conservancy worked out, with a couple to purchase the property. So, anyway, so they're both protected now. The other thing is that shortly after COVID, a couple of years ago, we found out that the owner of that property, who lived in Missouri, of the 2 mounds originally, lived in Missouri, and he was going to sell the rest of the property, and we got concerned. And I talked to the Conservancy. They wanted, I think, roughly $250,000, $200,000. They were going to have an auction. And so we did what we could, but in the end,